All right, this is part one of what is going to be a two-part little mini-series because when I recorded the entire thing yesterday, it was way too long. So we're splitting it up into two. Anyway, this is part one of my top 10 nodes, defenders, and counters for the Protect Global going into Season 24. Hey guys, what's going on? Okay, so this video is one that's been requested a lot, and I've kind of put it off and wasn't really sure that I was ever going to do this anyway, but the channel's a little bit dry for content right now after the latest Power Index episode, which kind of wiped me out mentally, and I've got some thoughts on this stuff, so I thought that I'd share. So the video is going to be basically, in my opinion, the top 10 nodes, defenders, and counters for those nodes and defenders and placements with the Protect Global for Season 24, of course. We've got about a week before that season starts. Here you guys see we have a beautiful infographic with the war map made by the lovely Kat Murdoch. She's the she's the artist who created the potato doll that's in the intro of my videos. She's fantastic. You guys should check her out on Twitter. She posts a ton of infographic stuff that's always gorgeous and always very, very easy to read. So we are going to do this countdown style, and I'm going to start with number 10 on my list. Now, the way that I did this list is a little bit weird. It's going to be basically the most problematic nodes ranked, 1 through 10, and then I'll have a few different defenders for each of those nodes that you might encounter that I think are problematic. Certain defenders on certain nodes, the node itself might not be as troublesome as a different node, but with that defender on it in particular, it might be more difficult. So this isn't going to be a list or a ranking of the hardest placements to fight against. It's just going to start with nodes, and then I'm going to go through a couple defender scenarios that you guys are likely to face on those nodes, and I'll let you know what my favorite counters are, and we can also kind of brainstorm a little bit. So I've got some ideas on untested counters, which people in 4Loki roll their eyes about a little bit. Starting with number 10, and it's going to be node 18, which is the second fight on Path 9 in Section 1. Path 9 in Section 1 has Hazardous Shift, or Shifting, Incinerate, and Poison. So it'll basically have phases that last for 9 seconds apiece. The first phase is always Incinerate. Generally speaking, you're going to want a double immune champ or a champ that benefits from being poisoned and incinerated. The two best options for just those two, I guess I'll give you three. Red Hulk obviously gets stronger with both of those. Emma Frost can deal with those if you guys are staying in diamond form. And then obviously Iceman is immune to both. Mephisto is also immune or resistant to both of those, but he lacks for damage, and we have used him in the past on War Attack for hazard shift fights, but I'm not sure that I would recommend him unless it's a low rank defender. But the most problematic matchup that I can foresee with Protect on node 18 is going to be Apocalypse. One of the other downsides of hazard shift and placing really strong defenders on hazard shift is with Stubborn completely gone, and with Protect almost certainly to be the next meta global tactic chosen by, I would guess, like 98% of defenses. Quake is just going to run right through Path 9 if that defender is quakeable. Apocalypse, obviously, every time you evade, he gains 10% full immunity to evade. So once you evade him 10 times with Quake, he'll be completely immune to your evade. So you're not going to want to ever Quake Apocalypse. And on this node, in addition to hazard shifting, poison, incinerate, you're also going to get physical and energy resistance that cycles and stacks. So it's going to start to really reduce the damage that you're doing. Now, if I saw that placement, I would assign a Red Hulk because of his heat charges stacking, and if you have like a max sig Red Hulk, for example, using a 565 Red Hulk, at max sig, each heat charge is going to bolster your physical resistance a ton, so you'll really be able to tank those specials on the block and stuff like that. So Red Hulk is going to be a really, really strong option there. And then if you can't use a Red Hulk on node 18, then my suggestion would honestly be to use a Human Torch with the pre-fight and just try to speed through that fight as quickly as possible. So you would need to use the pre-fight. Apocalypse does gain Incinerate immunity, so if you don't use the pre-fight, you're going to be lacking a lot of damage, and you're probably not going to get through that fight. You'll probably dive to block damage before you're able to kill him. The first 9 seconds of that fight, you're gonna be in the Incinerate phase, and you're immune to Incinerate. So you can just play that first 9 seconds as quickly and as possible, and you'll probably be able to do quite a bit of damage. And then once the hazard shift flips over to poison, you're just going to have to parry him to keep distance and play keep away for 9 seconds until the phase flips back to Incinerate. 2 more options, Guillotine 2099 and Warlock. If you were to mess up against Apocalypse on that node and die, you wouldn't give him a genetic code, which is beneficial because once he gets to 4 genetic code after winning 1 fight, if he's on War Defense, he is going to stun you on his first light attack into your block, so his second total attack into your block. Really makes for not a fun time. So Guillotine and Warlock are decent options. Warlock is going to have trouble with damage because of Apocalypse's bleed immunity that builds up. The complication with both of those is that you're going to have to basically play keep away for the first 9 seconds of the fight during Incinerate phase because neither of those champs are Incinerate immune. So those are 4 options. Rulk is just going to make it really easy. You can just parry, combo, block all the specials, and you're set. Ghost is commonly used on this path, but against Protect, it's really not advisable unless you have somebody that is legitimately masterful with Ghost. And you guys are probably familiar, but Panaman Pete is in my battle group. He's very, very, very strong with Ghost, as you guys are aware, and I still would prefer to send Red Hulk because even if Pete was capable of pulling off that fight, it's going to be a complicated fight with a very small margin for error. All right, so that is number 10. Number 9 is going to be Node 5, specifically with Dragon Man placed there. This infographic, by the way, specifically is for the intermediate brackets, tiers 10 through 12, so the node descriptions are a little bit different, so don't pay attention to those on this infographic. I'm talking about tier 1 here, and with tier 1, it is going to have, I believe it's called Power Struggle, and then it's also got Strike, Counter, Fury. So what those 2 things do is, number 1, you have a certain number of hits, medium, light, and heavy attacks you've got an allowance for, and once that allowance runs to 0, then the defender is going to passively gain Furies until you throw a special attack. You can't reset those Furies, you can't remove those Furies at all. However, they will stop increasing once you throw a special attack. Now, the second aspect of that node is you will not get any power, passively or otherwise, so 0 power, unless the defender gains a bar of power. So every time the defender gains a bar of power, you're going to also gain a bar of power, and then if they throw a special and they thus deplete their power, you're going to lose your power too. So you really, really want to make sure that you're timing your combos so that you're pushing them over a bar of power when you'd be able to chain your own combo into a special to prevent them from gaining a bunch of passive Furies, because then they start hitting super hard and you're probably going to die. And the reason that Dragon Man is so complicated here, he gains that passive power. It's not passive, it's active, it's from his buffs, but he gains those buffs automatically. You can shut them off by parrying him, and if you're able to bait an SP1 from him and block it, then he's going to spend those power charges to inflict a debuff that basically does nothing. It's just going to heal you from willpower. But on this node, because of Strike, Counter, Fury, you don't want him throwing a special before you're able to throw a special, because then you're going to lose your power and he's just going to keep stacking up those Furies. We've had great success placing him there the last 2 seasons, actually. Last season, mostly in my battle group, we ran Protect 11 out of the 12 wars, and that was one of the 2 spots that we placed Dragon Man, and he did really, really well in both spots. The other spot is higher on this list. So the number 1 option on this path for almost any defender is probably going to be Thing. And the reason that Thing is so good here, as Dreamin has kind of helped us learn in For Loki, is just parry, 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 build up your rock stacks to 20, and then don't ever throw a special with Thing, which is kind of counterintuitive for the node. And the defenders, because of those furies that they're gaining, are going to start to deal damage where every single time they touch you through a block, or if they were just to hit you unblocked, they're going to trigger Thing's protection automatically. You're going to basically be taking 0 damage. So you can just parry, combo the entire way. You do not want to throw a special if you're using Thing, because that will reset your rock stacks, and then the next blocked hit that you take, if they've got a bunch of furies, you're just going to explode. So that's one thing. A tip, if you guys are using Thing, would be to also try to bring Man-Thing along for the synergy. Once Thing gets to 20 rock stacks, as long as he doesn't use a special, prevent him from losing 5 rock stacks. With Thing, if you're holding your specials, you're going to cycle between 15 and 20 rock stacks. You're just going to go back and forth. It's on a timer, and when you're at 20 rock stacks, those extra 5 rock stacks between 15 and 20 are going to convert into furies for you. So you're going to have a lack of protection, 5%, and you can die during that period due to a blocked hit or an unblocked hit. So you'll never drop below 20 rock stacks as long as you don't throw a special. My second recommended option, if you don't have a Thing available, and you would need to have him at max sig also, would be Human Torch with Flame On. Again, the idea here is to kill Dragon Man as quickly as possible. Just make sure that you're getting your parry to stop the power charge buff that Dragon Man gets, and then also make sure that you're timing your combos so that you can throw your SP1s on recycle. Just try to nuke him down as fast as possible. If you don't have Thing or Torch, then here are 2 other options. You've got She-Hulk, who is a large attacker. She-Hulk can be really good for Dragon Man in general because she has a built-in taunt with her kit, and that can really help when you're fighting a Dragon Man. Dragon Man can get passive, and with those power gains, he can start to get a lot of power, and if he gets to an SP3, he becomes unblockable and unstoppable, similar to Thing, for a period of time, and he can just be a lot to deal with. So She-Hulk is also a good option, and then Red Hulk is a decent option. We've seen a lot of Red Hulks from the opposing alliance fail and die to Dragon Man on node 5 before, but you just really have to be on top of stopping his power charge buffs by parrying him and making sure that you're recycling your SP1s. So those are 4 attackers for Dragon Man on node 5. All right, next up, number 8, node 47 with Apocalypse on. This node has Powerful from Afar and Kinetic Transference at the tier 1 level. I believe that it's tier 1 and 2 have the same nodes. Apocalypse can be really, really tricky here. He's going to gain a ton of power. His SP1, although it can be fully dexed, same with his SP2, most players, especially in war, aren't going to risk it. They're just going to try to block it or partially block it and then dex some of it. And his power can get out of control. If he starts to throw his SP3s, he's going to start to inflict debuffs on you, which you're not going to be able to purify with a purification champ or anything like that. So the best solution here is to just lock him down, lock down his power. And my top option, the champ that I would assign to this fight, even with Protect, is going to be Magic. And preferably with Magic, you're going to want a Power Start 1 boost, and you should consider, it depends on how good you feel about the matchup and how strong your Magic player is, but you should consider intentionally taking a combo at the beginning of that fight, which is going to give you a lot more power than it's going to give him. Now, one thing to note about Magic, she's going to show up on this list as a recommended attacker several times. She is a small attacker, and the Protect Global is basically going to give the defender a 30% protection for every single attacker hit that is 300% higher than the attacker's base rating. All right, so it sounds confusing, but basically super, super high damage champs like Ghost, Corvus, they're not going to be recommended against Protect unless you have super skilled players that are able to intercept. The only way to remove those protection charges from the global with a non-large or higher champion, so with a medium or a small champion, is to intercept. And if you do an intercept, you'll remove 2 of them, I believe. Magic is going to have to do some intercepting only if you throw your SP2s and they crit. So Magic is not going to trigger the Protection Global unless she crits on her SP2. And if she crits on one hit of the SP2, it's going to inflict 1 protection for the defender. What you would need to do though, you're still going to be able to power lock the Apocalypse in this case, and then you're just going to need to have a Magic player that's comfortable doing the corner backdraft intercept and thus removing that protection with those intercepts. But as long as you're able to keep him locked down power-wise, that's not going to be too tough of a node for you guys to deal with. Now, if you don't have a Magic, then my next two best recommended attackers for that specific placement going to be Guillotine 2099. And again, you're in a situation where you're using a small attacker, and Guillotine 2099's secondary damage is going to count towards the Protect Global. But what you can do is you can either use one of your pre-fights, I believe it's Stability Function. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize, but it's the one that power drains them slightly. So use just that one, and or try to recycle your SP1s to power drain him if his power gets out of control or if he gets up to an SP3 or near it. With this matchup, if you do trigger protection, you're just going to have to naked intercept, and that's always really dangerous in war. That's why I really like Magic in this matchup. But if you don't have a Magic, then Guillotine 2099 is a decent option here. You're just going to probably have to do some intercepting. And then a third attacker option, this is untested, but it is a large attacker, an extra large attacker, and that's a Mortal Abomination. So you can inflict Petrify, which is going to help a little bit with those powerful from afar power gain buffs that he's going to get. And then obviously if you have an Awakened and especially a high sig IBON, when you inflict that Petrify, you're going to help with the power control a little bit. It's not a lot. But also you'll be able to recycle your acid burns as quickly as possible. So you want to get up to an SP2, throw that so that you have Toxic Aura, and then you're just going to want to recycle your SP1s, which are going to refresh your Petrifies, which is going to help a little bit with the power. And then also you're going to keep applying poisons to yourself, which is going to keep the Toxic Aura up. And as long as you've got Toxic Aura, you're going to be inflicting 1 poison debuff per second on the defender. And once that defender gets to 10 poisons, those poisons are converted into acid burn, which is going to do a ton of damage. And during acid burn, there is another second more powerful Petrify that IBON applies. So the other great thing about IBON is because of his ability to apply weakness debuffs on the defender just by blocking, as long as he has a poison on himself, you can really reduce damage that you take. And that counts for block damage if you're blocking Apocalypse's specials, and then you can even tank an SP3 or 2. So those are kind of the best options, I think, in that matchup. Now, one other thing here for node 47, if a tricky defender is placed here, a lot of times what I like to do is assign a Mr. Fantastic to that right island so that he can place the suppression field and petrification ray pre-fights on that fight for whoever we use to attack that defender. So the suppression field is going to reduce combat power, which is the power that a defender gains from striking the attacker or being struck by the attacker. And then Petrify is going to help reduce the power gain, the power that he's going to get from the power gain buffs. If you've got a Mr. Fantastic and you've got an Apocalypse or a really hard defender that you can't quake on node 47, Mr. Fantastic is really going to help if you use those 2 pre-fights, and then Magic's going to be your best option. Guillotine 2099 and Immortal Abomination are going to be secondary options in my opinion. Number 7 is going to be node 37 with Immortal Abomination on it. Okay, so you guys are probably familiar with this if you're in Tier 1. That node is going to have, number 1, Ebb and Flow Intercept, which I'll talk about in a second, and then it's also going to have Redoubled Determination. First of all, Ebb and Flow Intercept, if you guys are not familiar, the defender has a permanent protection on them that reduces all of the damage that they take by, I think, 60% unless they're intercepted. If you do an intercept on them, that removes the protection for, I believe, 12 to 15 seconds. I should know these details by now, but let's just go with 12 seconds, and it's going to give the attacker a Fury buff as kind of a reward for getting off that intercept. So you basically have a 12-second window after you intercept a defender here where you can get all your damage in, and then they're going to get that protection back. Now, one thing to note here is whenever that protection is triggered, so at the beginning of a fight and then after that cooldown, if you pull off an intercept here, whenever that protection re-triggers, it's going to also purify all debuffs that defender has on them. All right, and that's going to actually play a role against Immortal Abomination. So that's step one. Step two, or the second aspect of this node, is Redoubled Determination. If you guys are not familiar with that, every single debuff that is on the defender is going to improve a bunch of their stats. So it's going to give them higher combat power, which means that they're going to get more power from being struck and from hitting you. And certain debuffs, including poison and bleed, for example, are going to give them double the benefits per debuff. Immortal Abomination poisons himself throughout a fight. I'll talk about exactly how. And that can mean that if you combo him, he could go from 0 power to an SP3. And if he throws an SP3 against you, it's going to automatically inflict acid burn and you're going to die, basically. So you don't want him to get to an SP3 ever if you're fighting him in war. An Awakened Immortal Abomination is going to start with 3 poison debuffs. And a lot of people are going to assume that because he starts with 3 poison debuffs, that Redoubled Determination is going to make him a nightmare to deal with. But actually, because the Ebb and Flow protection purifies all debuffs, at the beginning of a fight, even an Awakened Immortal Abomination is going to have 0 poisons on him because the 3 that he would normally get from his signature ability are going to get purified. He's going to gain 1 self-poison for every 10 combo hits in the fight. So if he hits you 10 times, he's going to gain a poison. If you hit him 10 times, he's going to gain a poison. Every time IBON throws an SP1, he's going to self-inflict 4 poisons. And that's just really bad news. So you're going to need to turtle up and either bait heavies, or if you're able to reparry, turtle up, reparry, prevent him from throwing that SP1 and push him to an SP2 every time. For this matchup, we have 2 large attackers with Protect. The first one is Omega Red. I think that Omega Red is actually going to be by far the best option for this particular placement, keeping in mind that on this particular node, Immortal Abomination will not have his 3 poisons at the start of the fight because they're purified. So the node actually kind of helps you a little bit here. But you definitely want to get off an intercept so you can start to do real damage. So you're going to want to parry him, do a light combo or a short combo, 4 hits, back up, and then throw a light attack intercept. You're usually going to land that, and then you've got 12 seconds where you can do real damage. And at that point, what you're going to want to do is just slow play it with Omega Red and apply your degen. Now, your degen is going to count towards Redoubled Determination because it's an active debuff, but you can play around that. You can still bait his specials. Warlock is going to be another good option here. You just really need to be careful repeatedly throwing your heavy attacks because those bleeds are going to stack, and those stacked bleeds are just going to push his power up from Redoubled Determination. I would recommend just throwing SP2s only. All right, number 6, Node 14, Thing. Now this fight can really screw people up. The node buffs are Strike Counter Fury and Brute Force and Power Focus 1. Brute Force, of course, if you don't hit the defender within a certain amount of time, I believe it's 6 seconds, you're going to start to take passive degen damage. And then Power Focus 1 just means that the defender's combat power rate up to a bar of power is increased, I think, by 80%. But their combat power rate after they fill a bar of power is reduced drastically by, I think, 80%. So it's only 20% of what it normally is. So Thing can be tough here. You're not going to be able to Quake it. You could, if you're able to play around both Brute Force and Power Focus 1, but it's really not ideal. Your best attacker options, in my opinion, for this placement are going to be, these are going to kind of be tied. So Immortal Abomination is going to be one. If you guys have watched my channel, you know that I really, really believe in the IBON versus Thing matchup. On paper, it is, I think, one of the safest attacker options for Thing with any global. However, because I'm not a super skilled player, I have not done that matchup justice. But in the hands of a really skilled player, or even a player like me that's like, I would say, above average skill, but I just need a lot of repetitions before I master something, I think that IBON is going to be a great option here. And then Omega Red is also going to be a really strong option here, especially if you have somebody that's used to fighting Thing with Omega Red, and then you want to be able to weave in heavy attacks so that you can apply degen. So those are going to be the top 2 options for this matchup. For super deep rosters, another option is going to be regular Abomination with the Red Guardian synergy. He doesn't even need to be awakened. And with that synergy, if you guys aren't familiar, Abomination has a 50% chance on every single attack to inflict a poison debuff on the defender that stacks, and each poison debuff deals 70% of Abomination's attack. It can really, really stack up, and that's a decent option, but obviously in high tier war, you're going to want to use a 565 or a rank 2 or a rank 3 attacker, and a lot of people probably don't have Abomination ranked. And then here are two bonus options. We've got a fourth large attacker that's going to benefit from the attacker global with Protect, which by the way just means that you can knock the defender down and remove all of the protection on the defender as opposed to having to intercept. But the fourth best option is going to be, in my opinion, Crossbones. So if you guys are unfamiliar with Crossbones, every Fury that he holds reduces opponent ability accuracy by, I believe, 22% apiece. They do stack. They don't last for a super long time. You're going to basically get those by purifying debuffs, and then you can also get them by using your SP1 and by activating something called Overrun, where you back up, hold your block for, I think, a second and a half. You'll basically sacrifice block proficiency to gain a bunch of Furies, and if you have 5 Furies, you've reduced the opponent ability accuracy by 100%. So if you don't have an IBON and an Omega Red that you can send there, or an Abomination with the Red Guardian synergy, then Crossbones is a pretty good option there. And for the most part, you'll be able to kind of ignore his rock stacks because he shouldn't be triggering them if you have a bunch of Furies. And then the fifth option is a medium attacker, and that's Void. We use Void a lot for things. A lot of people seem to use Void for thing. And if you have a really good Void player, they can play around that protection, and he's still going to be a great option for Thing. The biggest complicating factor for this placement is, again, you have Strike Counter Fury that you have to deal with, and you're going to need to be recycling your specials. That's why I think that Immortal Abomination is going to be the best here, because you want to recycle your SP1s, which is going to apply poisons on yourself. Those are, 5 decent attacker options there. We've got Immortal Abomination, Omega Red, Abomination with the Red Guardian synergy, Crossbones, and Void. All right, that is it for part 1. I'll have part 2 posted hopefully tomorrow. This has taken a lot longer than I expected it to. If you guys have encountered fights that you feel like are harder or deserve to be in the top 5, let me know in the comment section. That is it, guys. I will see you in part 2 tomorrow. Have a good one.